to start with the workshop. So today we are very honored to have with us Florian Bay, who will present us a great educational workshop. Florian is an international speaker with backgrounds to chemistry. He was a nuclear engineer in energy sector and now he's a data analyst. He has been the TM district director in UK in a district of more than 5,000 people. He is a founder of a company called Speak to Lead, focusing on leadership and communication development. So I think he's a real expert in the area of leadership. Thus today he will offer us a great workshop of the importance of leaders being situationally aware. We encourage you all to open your cameras, your mics, microphones, and use the emotions of the chat, since the essence of these workshops is to be interactive. I will also, recording has also started. So let's welcome on stage Florian Bay. Florian Bay, leaders. Are you aware? Situationally aware. Leaders. Are you aware? Situationally aware. Florian Bay.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me in the first place to present in this workshop. It's always a pleasure to visit other clubs in other countries, especially within Europe, and to present some workshop. I think we're all, and the fantastic thing about doing online is you're still learning new things. This is the first time I'm doing a presentation on, and I can share my slides at the same time, which is, well, interesting, but hey, you learn something new every day. So I'm going to do my best to look at all of you on my phone camera right now. So situational awareness for leaders is a bit of a concept I came up over the years, but before we start to delve into detail about what kind of situational awareness really is, I want to kind of go and get a bit of a debate on what does leadership means.
Okay, we have some interaction.
How would you define?
Is this me not hearing it well, or it's interrupting for everybody?
No, no, it's just the same. It's just like I think that it's just buffering someplace.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so it's.
So we have some challenges with the connection, Florian.
Not sure if it keeps, if it keeps going between his Wi-Fi and his and his mobile or what. But, yeah.
I would suggest to have sounds from the mobile, Florian, maybe, till the problem is corrected.
Florian, the time you see muted.
So, sorry, I think there was an issue. So please put in the chat how you would define leadership. It can be anything. Someone that I would follow in difficult situation. Okay, I really like that one. I like the term follow, because it's going to be something making people do a job and feel they want to. Interesting. Making there is an interesting word, because for me, making is actually quite a strong word. It's when you take something and you potentially create it when it doesn't exist and so on. Turn to for advice. So different dimension there, more like a softer dimension about supporting people. What else? What else? Leadership is about providing methods and practices to face issues and opportunities, but leave free person to set up in their own way. Support a group of people towards common goal. I like that one, especially the word common goal. To influence and guide followers or other members of organization, painting a picture that the team can understand and follow. So there's a lot of very different definitions there, and all of these definitions are actually aspects of leadership. But there is nonetheless a common theme across many of these definitions. But before we go to that theme, let's look at the definition of leadership. Let's actually go beyond the definition. Let's look at where does the word leadership come from. So leadership, it's leader and ship. And the word leader is actually an Old English word. It's a word laden, I don't really know how to pronounce it, which could be defined as a cause to go with oneself, go before as a guide to accompany. Guide and movement are things that have already been mentioned here. And apparently there is an even older definition as well for a word that is similar but related, which is defined as traveling. And the thing which is kind of common across all of this is that leadership is really all about movement, about taking a group of people from point A and moving it towards point B, was doing a number of things along the way, which might mean guiding them, which might mean influencing them, which might mean supporting them, whether going got staff, really a lot of things that are leadership. As I kind of like to say, leadership is not easy, and it's something which is very, very multifaceted. But the essence of leadership, of what really a leader is all about, it is someone that is there to create some movement and support people throughout this movement, moving themselves, moving others, moving entire organization. Effectively, kind of leaders are, they have to create a wave in the first place, and then they have to surf on the top of a big wave. And a wave is a very powerful force that kind of moves across the earth and can be quite dramatic if it's uncontrolled. Because when we do movement that is uncontrolled, we can be just like this plane, we can crash and burn, and there's just only some bits and pieces that are left that we may or may not be able to put together. Leadership is actually a very powerful force, and there are many leaders out there that sometimes create some movement, but the movement that they end up creating actually slips out of their control, and some bad happening and arising actually. And any of risk of crashing, of hitting a wall. If, for example, we at the wheel of a car and we let go of the control, something can happen. Once when I was 10, I went atop of a horse for the first time. How do you control a horse? Well, you hold tight onto the reins. What did I do when I was on that horse? I let go of the reins at one point because I'm like, well, it's just complicated. And the horse started to go uncontrolled and so on. I can see some comments that my voice is slightly broken. My apologies for that. I have a very good connection with very good download speed, but the upload speed, unfortunately, is not good at all. So apologies for that. We're just gonna have to try and ride through it and cross our finger that it's gonna improve in 30 seconds or maybe in the next minute or so. Uncontrolled movement is a bad thing, but control movement is very fantastic. You could look at a motorway, at a train system, at anything where a lot of things happen that are tightly controlled by systems and a lot of things, and then magic can happen. There can be a transformation. We travel from point A to point B safely. And the difference, the key ingredient between uncontrolled movement and potentially crashing and burning and doing everything in a controlled way safely is, you've guessed it, situational awareness. And I really like this picture I found to kind of complement the word. It's a lady that's driving what looks like a slightly antique car. When you drive a car, situational awareness is really, really key. I remember when I started to learn to drive, it's like you got to be mindful of your blind spots, because you do have mirrors on the car, but the mirrors don't always give you all information about your surrounding. So you got to look over your shoulders to really see what your blind spots are. So that's what's really happening around you. But there's other information that you've got at hand as well. For fuel, how furthermore can you go? About your speed, how fast are you going? Are you respecting the speed limits? How fast are you going in relation to other cars? And when you are driving a car or piloting a plane, a ship, or even riding a bike, you're effectively leading this machine. You're leading this machine so that it can carry you from point A to point B. And you are being situationally aware of your surroundings, because if you're not situationally aware of your surroundings, bad things can happen. You could hit somebody, you could injure someone, there could be a lot of hurt, you could hurt yourself, you could break your own equipment. Very, very bad things can happen. And when we look at situational awareness in a leadership context specifically, one thing which we always must remember is when we are being situationally aware, this is kind of the maxim, we are seeing things as they truly are, not really as we would kind of wish them to be in some ways. Because sometimes we may have some rose-tinted glasses, or we may have glasses, in my own case, that I've had for 11 years and are now very worn out. So I actually don't see as clear things as clearly as I should. Hasn't really created any issues to me so far, but potentially if I wore these glasses for another 10 years, things might start to become a little bit problematic down there. And quite often we have some leaders, they think they see things, they see how the world around them is doing, or they are doing themselves, but they are not necessarily seeing these things as they truly are. And it can have a raft of consequences as a result. So there are 3 dimensions to situational awareness. Just like the world around us is a 3-dimensional world. We don't live on a piece of paper, which is just 2-dimension. Everything around us is 3-dimensional. There's even a 4th one, which would be a time dimension. And what are these 3 dimensions of situational awareness with regards to leadership? We can represent them as 3 circles on this Venn diagram. The dimension I've put at the top is the word. It's a very big one, and it is kind of the word around us. Something that could be happening on the street, in another country, on the other side of the world, potentially even in space, in theory, because if a comet was about to fall on the Earth, well, that would have an impact to all of us, and that's something that even happening outside of our own world in this case, but still in the universe which we are part of. The second dimension is the organization. And what I mean by this, it's really the group you. If one of you is perhaps leading a Toastmaster group, the Toastmaster group itself would be the group of people and the organization. And the third dimension is yourself. And as you can see on the diagram, all of these dimensions kind of overlap and interlocked with everybody. And the place where you want to be on this diagram is right at the center, where everything interlocks, where all the circles are interlocking, because this is really the place where you have the most situational national awareness. If, for example, you're aware about your organization and the world out there, but not about yourself, not the best position to be, as we can cover in more detail. So what do I mean in each of these dimensions? Let's delve into a little bit more detail on each of them. So our wider world. there was kind of a few questions I kind of put there on the slides, which are questions that you as leader need to ask yourself about the wider world in which you are currently operating in, or leading your organization and your group of people. The first one might seem obvious, but where are you really in this world? Because the country in which we live in which we operate, has a very significant impact on us, on a group of people. If I were to start a business in the UK, or if I were to start a business in Greece, the operating environment would have some differences. The law would be different. The tax rates would be different. If I wanted to get electricity, the procedure would be very different as well. So things would be different. It's things that we just cannot necessarily ignore. Yet sometimes you do have leaders, you have people that are in charge of organization, and they think, well, the world is really interconnected nowadays. Everything is the same across countries. Still not really the case. Another question I put out there, and you're welcome to add these own questions, it's not beyond and all, is what are the trends? There are trends that are shaping us, the world around us. And recently I heard well, and in the 1990s, they were really high. Their share price was going up and up and up and up and up. I remember as a kid saying to my dad, I think you should buy some Carrefour share because they keep going up, Dad. My dad eventually followed my advice and actually lost money for reasons that I'm going to make clear later. In the 90s, there was a trend in the world. The internet was starting to roll out, communications were becoming easier, and selling online was starting to become a thing. What did the Carrefour board do? They say, well, it's a fad. People will only gonna keep buying things in store. We have big stores. We're the market leaders. Things will stay this way. 20 years on, they're still a very large company, but they're not doing as well as they did 20 or 25 years ago. They ended up being behind on e-commerce and all of these things because they had ignored the trend at their own peril, unfortunately. Another thing I put there is who occupies your field. It's a little bit more specific and also touches on the organization and the group as well, but we never operate as a single actor, no matter how small an organizations you are. If I look, for example, in the case of Nokia, well, Samsung is one of your competitor. OnePlus, I have a OnePlus phone now, that's another competitor that makes phone. There's a lot of competitors out there which may or may not be doing well, and it's kind of good to know how they stand in relation to us, because if we don't, we might lose some precious clues. In the case of a small organization, like even like a tennis club, for example, where there are a lot of tennis clubs out there, and potentially some people may join other ones depending on how convenient they are and so on. We never operate in isolation. The challenges that lies ahead. Some of them are easy to predict. Sometimes some of them are not so easy to predict, like the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a black swan event. Could we have planned for it? Maybe we could have, but and this is a much broader debate. But it's nevertheless having an awareness that actually bad things can happen down the line, and it's best to always be prepared for it. And of course, when stuff happens in the wider world, how could it impact you? Sometimes we can assume that it's not going to impact us, but really, people may be familiar with something called the chaos theory. And the chaos theory is a mathematical concept that if you have a butterfly flapping its wing in New York, it could create small disturbances in the air, which mean that that will eventually coalesce into a rain cloud in London and trigger a storm in London. Now, it's quite metaphysical in a way, but maybe there's a grain of truth about all these things. When you look at the lake and you throw a rock in a lake, there are ripples that goes out, and these are impacts. But now let's move on to our own organizations or groups. And I am a big fan of history personally. And I love knowing about the history of any organization, because where an organization comes from could even be a country, for example, because a country is effectively just a very large organization. It does impact its trajectory up to the present and potentially what may happen in the future as well. And remember the saying, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And it's quite fascinating how sometimes things have a tendency to repeat themselves, and an organization can sometimes keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And that's where, let's look at where we come from, can help a little bit. How much information do you gather? You look at the car dashboard in the earlier example, you've got a speedometer, a ref counter. I like having a ref counter on the car personally. It might also tell you like your engine temperature, how much brake fluid you've got, and so on. But if you didn't have any of this information, you wouldn't really be able to make decisions, and driving might become more of a guesswork, and maybe using other senses like hearing to really understand what's going on. I kind of believe personally that knowledge is power, that the more information we can get, the better, especially since information these days is numbers. Numbers are data, and we can derive stories from numbers. One thing I love doing as a data analyst is you might take a massive spreadsheet and then you boil it down to a graph or a few insights, and the numbers really tell a story. It happens really, really often. But interestingly, there's a lot of organizations out there that sit on a lot of information, but they don't really do anything with it. That's not exactly being situationally aware, shall we say. And the other ones, really, what do we do well or not so well? Might seem like common sense, but how often do, as an organization, we sit down and ask ourselves, what is it that we actually do well and not so well? Now, different people are going to have different opinion of all of these things, of course, but it's nonetheless an interesting question to ask. And the last factor, especially always interesting to find out. I mean, a friend of mine told me recently, with regard to iPhones, for example, well, apparently the type of people that buy iPhones, they've got a lot more disposable income, a lot more money, so they wouldn't mind sending their phones to repair and so on, or paying for apps more than others. That's valuable information that you can then use to make the word of a situation. And last but not least, is there a pilot on the plane? Well, how is the pilot doing? How's the driver doing? Because fundamentally, you may have great numbers, great data, everything you might know around yourself, but if you yourself as a leader, you don't really know yourself well, you don't know your strengths, your weaknesses, and what you can do, very bad things can sometime ensure. One thing that fascinates me looking at history and looking at kind of organization is that there are many examples of somebody becoming a leader, reaching a position of leadership, and then the turn of events ended up proving that they actually weren't the best person for the role, that there were other people out there that could have done a better job because they were better at the things that were needed at the time. And there are many examples actually of people that end up being a position. Please share an example from business. I'll take the questions. I'll take the question at the end on that one. And they're like, okay, they end up in position of they might know the world around them pretty well. They might know the organization well, but because they don't know themselves really well, they're not as impactful as they could be. Because the diagram I showed earlier, there's overlap between the various parts. If you know yourself well and your organization well, but you don't know the world around you, you might make an impact, but not so much, or in fact, you might go completely down the wrong track. So all of these dimensions, they really they really overlap. Now, it's been a bit of a whistle stop tour. I'll have a couple more things to say at the end, but I'm aware that questions have been starting to come in, which is perfect timing because now we do have some time for questions. Please share an example from business where bad situational awareness led to bad disaster or bad result. I can think of a very good one actually. Kodak. Kodak was a company that made a lot of money for decades because if you had a camera, if you had, you needed to buy film, Kodak was making the film and even processing the film. However, in the 90s, there started to be a trend towards digital cameras and so on, and they completely failed to capitalize on this trend. They went down the other path of kind of more instant development and so on. They failed to capitalize on the trend, and now they're a minnow, which is a very small creature. It's a bit of an English word for that in the business world as a result of that, because they just didn't spot the trend. They were blind to what was happening, and they're like, okay, we've lost everything. What happened? Unfortunately, we only see a very minor part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So how can we possibly see things as they really are? Doesn't it apply to business too? To my eye, speculation and guessing is inevitable. That's a really good comment and question. And I really like the mention of the eyes only see one part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And my honest answer to all of this, Nikolaos, is going to be situational awareness is something that's not easy, in my opinion. The more I kind of start to kind of look into this concept, the more I realize that the first key is to actually say, well, I got to be aware of the world around me, but we can't always see everything. Like it's impossible for a business leader to see all the trend and monitor everything. But that in itself, to acknowledge that actually, as a single person, I may not see everything that's happening around me. That's already a form of situational awareness, because then you can make decisions. You can make decisions to get more information and to have other teams and other people to come in and support you as a result. One thing which I learned when I was working in corporate strategies, we always had multiple people checking. I would write something and somebody else would be checking it. And you would be surprised at the number of mistakes that we found when we were checking each other. That's very basic things, but it goes to show that sometimes we are blind to our own mistakes unless other people point them. So it's all about creating systems and feedback where you don't have just your eyes, but you also have the eyes of other people that are there as well. I can't really see the timer, but I suspect I am on the red light because it's already 4 o'clock, and I was kind of timing myself in the background. Thank you very much for being a great audience today.
We thank you, Florian. It was a really mind-opening speech. Can you hear us? We can't hear you if you're speaking.
Florian, would you mind opening the audio from your mobile, please? Because it's really lousy.
We'll have some.
I think that connection dropped on my machine. So I was saying, thank you very much for being a great audience. I do have a feedback form for this workshop, which I'm sharing in the chat. And if you want to get in touch, here's my email. Thank you, everybody.
I'm not sure if it makes sense to open the microphone for 1 or 2 more questions. I don't know, Olympia, if you think we might have the time.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable to answer if there are more questions.
I am happy to take more questions. Yeah.
There is a question if you could share some hints, advices for new leaders, how they can be more situationally aware for new leaders. We're not able to hear you.
My first advice would be to a new leader.
Now
be
we
curious and ask questions.
Maybe you could mute one device.
Be curious and ask questions is what I would say, because there's a lot of people out there, they don't always find out information for them, so they don't ask questions. It's actually a very good thing to ask questions. You cannot be an inner child, look at everything and ask questions. That's never take anything for granted. Ask why. Why, for example, are we as a business not doing so well? The answers might surprise you sometimes. And sometimes it could be that the people don't know the answers, which means dig into it further.
Really nice advice. Thank you.
Okay, one question from me. So are great leaders born or made? Is situational awareness for the born ones only?
I don't really think that leaders are born per se. They're all made or shaped by the environment and by circumstances around them. It could be, for example, that when they were younger, as child, as teenagers, there were circumstances that kind of predisposed them to leadership, like they had to face some challenges early because their parents couldn't look after them. So I personally wouldn't go as far as saying that leaders are born. They are made. Leadership is something that we can learn. And a lot of leadership really is not about aptitude per se and knowing more than other people. It is really about the attitude. Do you ask questions? Are you proactive? Do you try and make things happen, or do you wait for other things to happen? If there's another takeaway from this workshop would be leadership is really attitude and not so much aptitude per se. Aptitude does matter as well, don't get me wrong, but really I mean, asking question, being curious, it's really an attitude thing, which I personally wish more people add.
So Argiri, we all have hope, eh?
We all have hope. We're learning throughout our life.
We do indeed.
So let's grab these last words and ask if there are any other questions to Florian. Or we can. Yes, Metaxia.
It's not much of a question, Florian, but a statement saying that I totally agree with what you started the training with, which is to identify your blind spot. And identifying the blind spot, the way I see it, is understanding the lenses through which we see and understand our environment, meaning our corporate world and the world we're living in. And as people, we all have our own baggages, we've got our own lenses, and usually we don't see reality as it is. So self-awareness is, as you said, understanding yourself is paramount.
Yeah.
So I would like to thank you for today. It was nicely put. Thank you, Florian.
It's really important and a very great opportunity to have the possibility to hear such speeches and workshops, and we're very glad that Florian accepted also this invitation for us speaking today.